Hello everyone and welcome to another very nice game. It's from round 3 of the Altibox Norway Championship, and even though the event has already finished and we know who won and with how many points, we still said that we are going to cover some of the nicer games and some of the games that you guys suggested. So this is a game from round 3, Alireza Firouzja versus Fabiano Caruana, and this is an Armageddon game, so to say, because their classical game was drawn and then they immediately play an Armageddon game. So this is one event that is special like that. It's impossible for a round to end in a draw. So you can draw the classical game, but then you play an Armageddon and you will either, you will gain some points, but not half which you would in a classical setting. So it's very interesting, and it features a line that has never been seen before, and it's quite an exciting line. I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy it. Let's dive straight into it. So Firouzja with the white pieces opens with knight to f3. We have the Areti opening, d5, we have d4, and now knight to f6. So through a bit of a different move order, we transpose into the Cole system with e3 and c5. Alireza grabs the c5 pawn and now e6, preparing to capture it. But now b4 defending that extra pawn, which is something we're taught as children to never do, as you're gonna run into a lot of trouble. But you know, it's 2020. We have help from really strong computers. We have help from AI, from Leela, from AlphaZero, and you know, new things are being learned every day. So here a5. This is the way I learned it. You know, through books, you just attack these pawns that are defending the extra pawn that white is trying to keep. So here c3 and a captures on b4. We have c captures on b4 and now b6. Again, trying to get white to capture, to go bishop to b4 check, and so on. So here Alireza goes bishop to b5 check, and this is nothing new. This has all been played before. Bishop to d7 blocking, and now bishop captures on d7. However, here's the difference. Known moves here are knight b captures on d7 and the knight f captures on d7. However, the move Fabi plays, queen captures on d7, is a new move, and now it's already as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. And here Alireza's plan is to not worry about this, but actually just play a4, sacrifice a pawn to get two connected pass pawns on the queen side, and this is what's really awesome here. Fabi grabs it, b captures on c5, and now b5, and this is what I meant. It's only move 11, and already Alireza has two connected pass pawns on the queen side. It's not all that bad for Fabi either, because he's up a pawn and he already has a passed c pawn. So it's gonna be a crazy game. Fabi continues developing. He wants the castle. He goes bishop to d6 and bishop to b2. An excellent square for the bishop on this long diagonal, and Fabi says, I'm not worried about capturing on f6, I'm just gonna castle, and if you capture, you're just giving up a beautiful dark square bishop. You're gonna mess up my pawn structure a little bit, but I'm not all that worried. You don't have any sort of an attacking setup going on here. So here just knight b to d2, Fabi continues Alireza continues developing, and we have c4. Opening up the bishop while pushing his pass pawn. We have queen to c2, and now queen to c7. We have castles by Firouzja, and now knight b to d7. The knight has a lot of options here. You can come to e5, to c5, to b6, all depending on what white plays. And here you don't want to, well, constantly have to worry about what happens if this pawn lands on c3, just bishop to c3. And this will give you additional support for pushing your pawn to a5, as now the bishop and the rook are defending it. So here, knight to c5. From here, the knight can come to e4, the knight can come to d3. And now Alireza doesn't waste time with rook f to b1 to add support to his pass pawns, but rather just a5 right away. So very interesting, but those pawns are marching up the board. Here, after a5, we have knight f to e4, offering some trades here, and here knight to d3 was also an idea. Fabi prefers knight f to e4, and now just b6. Alireza continues pushing. We have queen to b7, keeping an eye on the a6 square, and now bishop to d4. Just keeping the tension. Fabi trades a pair of knights. knight captures on d2, we have knight captures on d2, and now knight to d3, the other knight finally lands on d3. Now, this is an excellent square for the knight, however, there is one downside to it. The problem is you will have issue pushing c3 at any point if the c3 pawn is the only thing guarding this knight here. So rook f to b1, Alireza adds more firepower to the a and b line, and now rook to a6, blocking the a pawn. Another idea here was e5, but it's just an idea that's constantly in the position, but you never know when to play it, and I will show you what I mean by this. So first rook f to b1, and here Fabi blocks it with rook to a6, and now rook to b5. Alireza just grabs more space, everything is just nicely defended, and you don't have a light square bishop to attack this rook. You only have a dark square bishop and the knight, and it's very unlikely that you can ever attack this rook. And here is what I mean by this. Here e5 is an incredibly complicated move because it allows white to go for this beautiful sacrifice. Knight captures on c4, d captures on c4, and now queen captures on c4, attacking the knight here. E captures on d4, we have queen captures on d3, and now of course you cannot capture because the bishop is hanging, but you can play rook to d8, and then you allow e captures on d4. And we would get this position where everything is completely crazy. Fabi would be up a bishop, but Alireza would have 3 passed pawns for that bishop, and it's it's just incredibly difficult to play for black because I mean that queen and rook can never move. If those pawns start marching up the board, it's just game over, and it's very hard to say if black would be able to withstand the pressure here. So while e5 is a constant idea, Fabi still waits with it. So here he first brings the rook to c4, to c8, now adding additional protection to that c pawn, and now you are also aligning it with the queen. So here rook 8 to b1 by Firouzja. You could also, instead of rook 8 to b1, go e4. e4 is also a constant idea in the position because you just allow, for example, if d captures on e4, knight captures on c4, and it's just a beautiful position for white. It doesn't matter that you've allowed this queen to now be fully aligned with the rook. For example, if queen c6 attacking the knight, just b7, and I mean you can see that good things are happening. If rook to b8, then you no longer have to worry about the knight, just queen to b3, and you are making excellent progress here. So after this rook to c8 move, we have rook 8 to b1 by Firouzja, and now comes h6. Here both players just waste a little bit of tempi to make some breathing room for their kings. So g3, again, waiting with the c4 idea, g3 by Alireza, and now bishop back to e7. We have e4, finally by Alireza, but now e5. Finally, Fabi goes for it. We have bishop to c3, and now it's a question. What do you play here? Even feel free to pause the video here and try to find the absolute best move for Fabi while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding such a move, as it's not an easy move to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's d4. It seems rather obvious to play it, but you know, it just brings a whole lot, because after bishop to a1, you have to find knight to b4, and here just everything completely explodes. You are now ready to push these passed pawns. You are giving up, you can grab a knight and bishop for a rook here, but it all works out very nicely. For example, rook captures on b4, bishop captures, rook captures, and you can now eliminate the a5 pawn as well, which means you will eliminate the b6 pawn, and then, I mean, this massive pawn chain here against one extra piece. White's gonna have a terrible time defending this. So while you could play something like bishop to b2, as your bishop was hanging, you would then allow c3, which is completely winning for black. And if you decide to give back the piece to win back some of the pawns, for example, captures and captures, well, obviously not with the queen, but for example, knight captures on c4, you can then play queen to e7, attack the rook here, and after you move the rook, for example, rook to b1, you're gonna go rook 8 to c5, put pressure on the knight here, and it's just a very interesting position where black will always be better. Yes, white still has a passed pawn here, but black's passed pawn is stronger, and you never have to worry about this rook to b8 is coming. So it's just a really crazy position. And I think calculating all of this from this position where Alireza played bishop to c3 would just require too much time. And this is not a classical game, this is an Armageddon game, so of course the pressure is on Fabi to decide what to do here. So here Fabi plays bishop to c5 instead. He puts pressure on the f2 pawn, now wants to capture this, but now he gives Alireza the opportunity he needed, and Alireza goes for it. Rook captures on c5, so he gives up the exchange, knight captures on d5, and only now e captures on d5, so grabbing that d5 pawn, queen captures, and now queen to f5. Alireza goes for that rook on c8, we have rook to d8, and now comes rook to b5, pinning that knight, so now the knight cannot move, and you can't really break through the d file as the bishop is nicely defending the knight. Here you're keeping an eye on the a5 pawn, so it's not that easy for black to decide what to do. Here we have f6 as that e5 pawn is looking pretty, well, maybe not weak, as the bishop is still guarding that knight here, but Fabi wants to just strengthen the position, so he pushes f6, and now b7 by Firouzja. So now b8 is coming, you have to defend that. We have queen to d6, now both the queen and the rook are guarding this, but now comes a beautiful move by Alireza, queen to c8. Now just threatening to promote the pawn. Of course, if you capture the queen, then you've just given up a rook, because white instantly gets another queen into the game, and Fabi is forced to go into a very unfavorable endgame for him, which starts with knight captures on b7. So you have to give up the knight here, and there was nothing better to be done here. So queen captures, and now queen to c6, just immediately offering a queen trade. And you will have to try and hold on to this endgame. So queen captures on c6, we have rook captures, and rook to b6 now. Here Alireza says, okay, I have a bishop and knight for your rook, let's trade a pair of rooks, and I'm down with playing this. Fabi says, okay, we're gonna wait a bit, we're not just gonna trade everything just yet, and Alireza continues pushing a6. As this game is all about the pushing, you can see from the title, from the quote above the board, so we're just pushing this game. a6, we have rook to a8, Fabi of course blocks the queening square, puts pressure on the a6 pawn, and now comes knight to e4. Now the knight is also coming to help out. We have rook to c7, and now of course knight to c5, guarding that a6 pawn, and there isn't well, there just isn't much you can do here. If you allow something like rook to b7 to be played, that's pretty much game. So here rook to c8, putting pressure on the knight here, but now rook to b5, just keeping the tension, defending the knight nicely defends the a6 pawn, all is well here. We have h5 by Fabi, and now h4, and king to h7. We have king to g2 and king to g6, both players improving the position of their kings, king f3, king to f5, and king to e3 by Alireza. We have rook to c6, Fabi sees that well, there's not much we can do here. At some point we will have to give up the rook for that pawn, as there is nothing much to be done here. So here we have bishop to b4, and now here, while you could try and prolong the game with something like g5, you can just play captures, king f3, so not much for black to do here. So Fabi instead goes for something, well, rather extraordinary. He plays c3. He gives up the pawn here, so he can grab the a6 pawn with this idea. So bishop captures on c3, but now he doesn't go for it right away. For example, if rook a captures here, rook captures, and you can capture the bishop here, he doesn't like playing against the knight, so he would much rather play against the bishop. So here he just plays king to g6, and now bishop back to b4. But now he goes for rook captures on a6, and now he's going to play against the bishop rather than the knight. So knight captures and rook captures, and here Fabi is up a pawn, but Alireza has a bishop. So can you even play this? Let's see how Fabi does it. We have rook to b7 by Alireza, going for that bishop to f8 move, so you can capture on g7, which is game then. So rook to a8, not allowing the bishop to land on f8. We have king to e4. Now, of course, if you push, then king can capture, and now rook to d8, trying to cut off the white king. But just bishop to c5, not allowing any rook to d4 ideas. We have rook back to a8 by Fabi, and now king to d5. We have rook to a5, Now, pinning the bishop, rook to a7. Of course, Alireza wants to get rid of that rook, so rook to b5, and now king to c6. Attacking the rook, rook to b2. It doesn't matter because this bishop is guarding the f2 pawn, so you don't have to worry about anything here. King to d5 now. Again, pinning the bishop, but now king to c4. We have rook to b8 and now rook to c7, guarding the bishop from this side, and now the king will finally be able to enter the game. We have rook to a8 and the king to d5 now. Now there's really no point in going rook to a5 because the rook guards the bishop. So here we have rook to a2. Sorry about that. They seem to be drilling something right in front of my door. Sorry if you can hear that. King to e6, and now rook to a6 with check. We have king to e7, and now king to f5. Fabi starts bringing his king deeper into the position, and now king to f7, going after this g7 pawn. We have g5 by Fabi, and now bishop to e3, saying, okay, you're welcome to capture that, I don't really mind. We have g captures on h4, g captures on h4, and now king to g4. Fabi would be incredibly happy if he could capture on h4 here. However, rook to c4, check by Alireza, forcing the king to go back, and now just king to g6. The h pawn will now be eliminated, and it's just going to be very hard for Fabi to defend this. We have e4 by Fabi, and king captures on h5. We have f5 now, hoping to get this f4 move in, but king to g5. Now the f4 square is nicely guarded by the king and by the bishop. We have rook to a5, now not allowing the push as it would be check here. And here you don't really have much to do. Rook to c5 is one way to go about it, as you pretty much take care of everything. Bishop to f4, the move Alireza plays, is a different way to go about it because you simply don't allow the f4 move. So here we have just king captures on f2, grabbing that pawn. Fabi now also has a passed pawn, well, two of them. And rook to c2 check. We have king to f3 and now rook to c3, pushing the king further back, king e2, and now h5. Alireza starts pushing his passed pawn. We have rook to a1, and now trying to get some checks in and control the passed pawn from here, but just h6. We have rook to h1, and now king captures on f5. So only one passed pawn for Fabi left, and the e3 square is guarded, so there's not much you can do here. King to f2 is played, but just king captures on e4 as there's no way to protect it. So king captures on e4, and it was in this position that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, and a beautiful victory for Alireza Firouzja in round 3. Not in classical, but in Armageddon, but still, just a wonderful victory. Here you resign because whatever you do, let's say you go rook to h4, you try something, just rook c2 check, and then after the king moves, you can just play, for example, rook to h2, and that's game. You either trade rooks and then the h pawn queens, or you, well, not that, but you can try and prolong with rook to g4, but just h7, you guard g8. There are no moves here for black. So yeah, after this king captures on e4 idea, Fabio resigned, and a beautiful, beautiful victory for young Alireza here. And we're going to show the standings one more time. I don't know if all of you have seen the standings. So these are the standings, and it's pretty incredible. Magnus, again, yes, he wins the event, one full round before the tournament ended. But second place, Alireza Firouzja, ahead of some very, very strong names like Levon Aronan, Fabiano Caruana, young Krzysztof Duda, and Arjan Tari. And it's a very interesting event with a very interesting time format. So first you play a classical game, and then after the classical game you immediately play the Armageddon. So we cannot have a tie. Like if we draw the classical game, we immediately go into Armageddon, and then someone has to win. And with this setup, with this sort of a modern time format, young Alireza was able to clinch second place ahead of some legendary names here. So it's gonna be very interesting to see how he will do in future classical events, because I don't think we have a classical event that immediately goes into Armageddon after this. I think they tried something at the Gibraltar, or they were planning on doing something, but other than the Altibox Norway Championship, I don't think there's such an event. I could be wrong though, I could be talking nonsense. We're gonna blame it on the anesthesia as usual, but I don't think there is one. So really, really amazing stuff. We'll see what happens in the future. Alireza really, if Magnus was not here, I mean, we would have Alireza in front of all of these names. So, you know, the future of chess is in good hands. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, we probably will cover some other games. I'm gonna go through them, you know, just to check if there are some interesting ones. And once we're done with that, we're gonna continue, of course, none other than the Paul Morphy saga. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Andrea Silvestri, Jonathan Mallet, V. Lawrence Coker, Dor Kotikoglu, and Malachi Hevahan for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing probably this short coverage of the Altibox Norway Championship, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.